Welcome back all, I'm Dazzy J from Model Techniques. This week we got Geoff Bunza from Portland, Oregon. His specialty is animation on model railroads using Arduino and Raspberry Pi. So some of the work that he's doing in this space using little motors and all sorts of other componentry is off this chart. So you'll agree with me when you watch the video, just the passion this man has for this arm of the hobby, and he's basically dedicated his life's work for the betterment of ourselves. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment below. Also, I've got a Patreon page. Thanks for a big shout out for all my Patreons out there and super fans. Every little bit helps to keep the content rolling. So without further ado, let's get started. Scenery lighting without wiring, so powerful yet so easy. DwarvenEnterprises.com. Dwarven Enterprises will be offering MRT viewers a 10% discount on all sales. Use the code word MRT 2021 to get this deal. Welcome aboard, Geoff Bunza from the lovely state of Oregon up there in the north in Portland. So thanks for chatting with me at Model Techniques today.
Glad to be here.
So, Geoff, now you can be found on a myriad of places, and I will put all these links below so everyone sort of knows what we're looking, because you've got some fantastic articles on what we're going to talk about, animation and microprocessors and the like. So you've got a website which is scaleanimation.com. You also got a blog post which links off your website for model rail hobbyists. That's how I came across you in my journey into Arduino and Raspberry Pi. And also you've got a YouTube channel. If you just type in Scale Animation, it does actually pop up. But as I said, we will link to all those below. So welcome aboard, Geoff. So thank you so much for taking time away from your modeling and your family this evening to chat with us here at Model Techniques.
Pleasure.
So I always like to get to sort of a little bit of a background on who I'm interviewing or who I chat to on their history and the hobbies. So how did your journey start into model trains?
My journey started probably when I was about 5, and my family took a rail trip either on the Erie or the Pennsylvania Railroad to visit a relative in Pennsylvania. And in the process of staying overnight, they abutted a rail yard. And my earliest memory was actually waving at an engineer who waved back at me going by.
Yeah.
That was important because from there on out, I was interested in trains of any kind, prototype, models, whatever, and got for a present an early Mantua set, added on to that, and throughout grade school, high school, I was involved in that. And it turns out that the electricity aspect of model trains got me interested in doing lighting for, of all things, school dances. And I was working with the head guy who was arranging that. And he suggested that I look at using transistors in the 1960s to control my trains, which I did, and promptly blew out every one I was able to get a hold of. But it actually ushered in a closer bond, I think, with model train control, and eventually that stayed with me, got me interested in computers indirectly. That got me interested more and more in electrical engineering, and that brought me to MIT. And you would think that in college that was the end of the hobby for the typical interim period, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And the reason that it wasn't was MIT has a tech model railroad club, and I joined that, and the people there were great, and they were controlling their trains with old switching systems from the telephone company.
Yeah, lovely.
And the people who were involved with that were very gracious in introducing me to that. And it stayed with me after I got married all through my life. It never really dropped out.
Yeah.
And the one thing that grew over time besides electronics, since it had ushered in my career, my background in education, teaching, and commercially is in electronic systems design. And staying with that and raising a family, there were two, I'd say, significant things that occurred. One was when my sons were quite small, we went to Disneyland and we saw the animatronic President Lincoln giving an address.
Wow.
He would stand up, give the address, and I was stunned that somebody could do that well. And then later, still interested in trains, I was on a sales visit in England near Hungerford, and the gentleman I was with brought me over to what I found out later was the Pendon Museum.
Yeah.
And the Pendon Museum is a very elaborate recreation of a shire that was where an immigrant settled. And I think he was from Australia, in fact.
Yeah.
And he was so enamored with the shire, and he was disappointed that everything was being torn down to make way for new buildings. He started modeling the old buildings in great detail.
Yeah, it's a lovely layout.
It is if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about.
I haven't been there, but I have seen some of their videos online, and I'm trying to get a representative actually from them to come onto my show and have a chat about it, because it's just phenomenal modeling.
They do phenomenally great modeling. There's all kinds of stories that go with it too. But my story was that when I went there, we were ushered into the building when it just opened, and we're in the sort of gallery in the walkway looking upon the layout. And all of a sudden a voice comes on the loudspeaker and he says, "Welcome to the Shire." And here comes the 1241 freight coming through the Shire. Here's the 115 express coming through, and it's going to stop at this village or this town. And it was the story that announcer gave that wove together the experience, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah, lovely.
And believe it or not, it had such an effect on me that it came back when I got more and more interested in animation with these two events, that I developed a kind of a philosophy about animation being composed of modeling with light, motion, sound, the synchronization thereof, and the fifth element being story. A really good animation needs to tell a story. And that's what I try to do now. And that's what I'm trying to develop my skills over time. And I keep getting sidetracked by other things, and we'll probably explore that along the way too.
Model Trains is good at that.
Excuse me?
Model Trains is very good at that, going down different
Model Trains is very good at that.
We call in Australia, you're burrowing down in different rabbit holes. So you start on one end and you start going a little bit sideways. I think it's fascinating, just to go back a little bit, just that simple wave from a locomotive driver back in the day started your journey here. And it's quite interesting you bring that up. I listened to another podcast called A Modeler's Life, which is, I don't know if you know Lionel Strang from Canada.
I've listened to it too.
Yeah. And obviously they quite often have locomotive or prototype locomotive drivers on there. And they say exactly the same thing. Every child that's on the on the side of the road, they will wave at them, because it just may be one child that brings them into the hobby. And it's living proof with yourself that you've dedicated your life to this hobby effectively.
Absolutely.
Now, it's quite interesting. Also, I never gave you my lineup here, exactly what I was going to chat to, but obviously, you're obviously seeing exactly what we've talked now. The other thing was your passion, which obviously we've briefly talked about. Now, I think you're exactly right. Where do you think, I suppose, animatronics within model trains is going? We look at layouts like Pendo layout that you talk about, the Miniature Wonderland, which is obviously another big one in Hamburg, Germany, which is they sort of take it to the nth degree as well, exactly how they're a scene within a scene, and as you rightfully say, modelling light, motion, sound, and telling a story within. So where do you see that sort of going within model trains?
In the large, well, I'm going to answer it in two ways. I'm going to answer it for me, and I'm going to answer it in the large, what it's doing for the hobby. What I think it's doing for the hobby is making modeling more interesting.
Yeah.
I first started out giving presentations in clinics about LED lighting, and the fact that you could use these incredibly tiny lights to, in effect, you had an HO scale light that was very bright, that was about as big as an industrial light bulb, and that's amazing to think about.
Yeah.
And then you could place it almost anywhere, and that you can wire it so that you can make the wires essentially invisible. That was a phenomenal thing, and a lot of what the strong reaction I get when I do clinics is a reaction to, look, I'm giving you tools, and you're going to make incredibly better models than you're making now, right? In fact, I generally go into my clinics assuming everybody in front of me is a better modeler than I am. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give them a couple of tools and techniques to make their models even better. So if you have an industrial building and it's a flat against the wall and it's only about an inch deep, if you put random lighting in the that building and you're careful about it, all of a sudden you've got this thing that's not just sitting against the wall, but it's representative of life in that particular part of the town or that particular building. Yeah. That's another dimension to the modeling that if you just left it out, it just is static. It's there. It's kind of a lump on the layout, but you can do really interesting things with it that enhance the modeling. Yeah, sure. So I think these kinds of things that I'm talking about and that I am interested in, I think it strikes a nerve with other people, because if you show them, look, with a little bit of effort, you can make this happen or that happen or that happen. You can add light, you can add motion, you can add sound, you can coordinate things, and you can create some effects that they weren't able to create before. So their models, I think, become really more in-depth, more interesting. Yeah, sure. Now, mine, on the other hand, I'm heading in a slightly different way. I'm not an operator. I'm not, they usually subdivide model railroaders in a number of different ways. I rarely ever hear the subdivision that I consider myself in. I'm a modeler. Yeah. I'll model anything. Yeah. I'll model in any scale. I'll model with any materials. I love to build models, and that's been my whole life, is building models. And if I can make the models better, meaning more realistic or more to life or more satisfying for me, that's even better. Yeah, lovely. So the layout that I'm trying to create is a little odd in that whether I have one operator or two or three or four, to me, is not the most important thing. What I'm trying to do on my layout is to create what other modelers might call scenes. I would morph that into scenes with stories. And when I'm driving a train through the layout, like I'll give you an example. I have a train coming up through a crossing, a grade crossing, right? Okay, so if it's quote unquote animated on most layouts, what's going to happen? The lights are going to flash, the bell is going to go off, and the gates are going to come down until the train goes by, right? Well, suppose that didn't always happen like that. Suppose that there was a crossing shed with a guard. Suppose that there was a car that approached the grade crossing. Suppose that there were onlookers nearby. Suppose that there was an animal in the brush. And suppose that every time your train came up to that crossing, a different sequence occurred. So instead of just the gates coming down, the gatekeeper might come out and say, oh, he's late again, or something like that. Yeah. Or a car may come to a screeching halt, right as the train is coming through the crossing. or a boy and his father on the side. The boy may wave and the father may wave, reminiscent of the story I told you before. But if every time you went through that crossing, a different sequence of events occurred, that's interesting to me. Now, if I could create enough combinations of events so that I couldn't predict ahead of time which sequence was going to occur or what sounds were going to occur, that would make life interesting at that particular scene. And each one would tell a different story. So what I'm trying to do on my layout is build a collection of scenes where, as I move trains through the scene, or I simply walk around the layout, different things happen that are coordinated that I can't predict. And that's where I'm heading.
Yeah, that's
and
nice.
This is probably the first time that I actually elaborated on that. I really haven't written about that, but I have written about, to me, it's monotonous when you have quote unquote animation turning on your layout, and it's a gas station sign revolving. Okay, that's nice, it's cute, it's interesting, but after I've seen it revolve, the first 40 times, I know that it's going to revolve the next 40 times. But suppose that instead of just revolving, it broke down and it made noise and it flashed lights and something else happened. Then if I create that sequence with a certain amount of randomness to it, I'll never know what it's going to do next, especially if the sequences could be thousands of combinations of things. And we're going to see that in at least one of the videos that you've got.
Yeah, definitely. My mind is just, I'm still back on the grade crossing thinking, I'm currently working with a chap here in Australia that we're actually doing a grade crossing, or level crossing, what we call them in my part of the world. And my mind's just thinking, how can we add sequences, as you suggest, to that? So it's not just boom gate going up and down, lights flashing, and the bell going off, so to speak. So you may be getting more future emails from me regarding that. That's for sure. So, sorry, go on.
So in my world, in my layout, what I'm trying to do with animation is to create the variety, to create the variations, to create, in effect, a certain amount of chaos, so that whether I'm operating alone, whether I'm operating with a friend or two, they're going to experience a set of variations that they can't completely predict. I can't completely predict. And if the number of combinations is high enough in a particular scene, you'll never find the sequence, or be able to look at the sequence and say, oh, it's in this number 47 sequence, and it's going to do this, this, this. You'll never be able to pick it up.
Yeah, nice. I think it's fascinating.
In my world, my model railroad world, it's that. And along the way, I found that people are interested in using some of the techniques that they've never seen before. And they could do some really interesting things, with their modeling. They don't have to follow what I'm trying to do, because some of what I'm trying to do is complicated. And there's I mentioned before that I get sidetracked with other projects. Well, we're gonna talk about one of those projects with the El Cajon caboose. People will come up to me and say, I bet, how would you do this? Or I bet you can't do that. Or, I imagined I can do this. And they said, someday somebody's going to figure out how to go and do that. Well, that's like throwing the challenge down in front of you.
You definitely definitely don't want to say that to a model operator. You can't do that, because there's always someone out there that will do it, and you're living proof of this. So it's just fascinating. 'Cause obviously, talking back just to right away with the trains, trains have sort of, they run better, they look better, they're more highly detailed. They're to a point where, are they going to get any better? Who knows? I'll throw that out there to the manufacturers to say that maybe they can't. I'm sure they'll prove me wrong. But now, I think what's so exciting about this electronic side of things, and I'm just starting to delve into this world myself, is to create that story. It's not just about the trains running around on a HO track or O gauge or N gauge track or whatever the scale you choose. Is the story is beyond that. It's the little backyard. Someone putting up the washing or something like that. Those little scenes within a scene, I think, is what makes a model railway. And then you're just adding another flair or another level to that is by adding some sort of animation to that. So my hat goes off to you. I'll probably even have gone through half of your undertakings on your website, and I'm just like, each night I've been going through them and going, wow, that's just amazing. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I hope you use some of them.
I will.
And make better models.
Yeah. So for the people that sort of don't know what we're talking about, the bare basis, and please, Geoff, tell me if I'm wrong, we're starting with sort of the microprocessor side of things, which is either Arduino or a Raspberry Pi, which is sort of the brand names. Is that sort of where this animation starts its journey?
No. No, and it really doesn't have to. And typically when I talk about animation, the place where I start is with lighting.
Right.
And the reason is you can do a tremendous amount strictly by paying a lot more attention to lighting. And it's gotten to be a really favorite clinic that I do. And I'm still amazed that people come to it. Because when I start, I typically talk about the essentials of LEDs, which I think is not well represented in the modeling world. The people get all kinds of things messed up with it. But the variability of what you can do with a LED, the size the differential you can get, the color, how you can manipulate it. That really, to me, is the very beginning. And I usually start with LEDs and lighting.
Sure.
And the reason is people understand that I can turn it on and off. Okay, you don't have to get beyond that. But now you say, okay, well, what if I positioned it in a certain way to make it look a little bit differently? Or suppose that I put a color combination. Suppose I took an LED and I took a bright white one and a bright blue one, and I put them right next to one another, and they were really tiny.
Sure.
And I simply controlled how they flickered on and off. And it wasn't random like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
I can show you that I can make what looks like a welder welding a piece of metal. And it looks really good. In fact, the very first time I demonstrated it at a convention, I had a professional welder come up to me and say, that's the best welding job I've ever seen in a model.
That's fantastic.
Right. And I was thrilled with that. That was the best possible feedback I could have gotten.
Yeah, lovely.
But once you get to that point of realizing, okay, now if I control the light, if I control the intensity, if I control the position, if I control the timing, I can do a lot with that lighting. So I start there with lighting, and then I say, okay, you understand that. Another example, I have an old-fashioned fluorescent light. What happens when I turn the old-fashioned fluorescent light on? Does it just turn on? Well, no. It turns out it flickers on, right? Because it had the old starter and the old ballast, and it was different. Now you have instant on, they pop on, it's kind of boring. But if I'm modeling in the late 50s and early 60s, it's going to turn on with the flicker. Well, I can get you to that flicker in an instant, and it'll do it every single time. And people start to notice it.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So if I want to flicker on a bluish glow fluorescent, I can easily do that. And I can show that with a $2 Arduino, and if I show you simply how to load it, you don't have to know how to program it. You just have to know how to load it and connect it. All of a sudden, you can have all kinds of lighting effects that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
And that's where I start. And I start with the most basic, the cheapest thing I can, because a lot of people think that, well, this is going to cost me $100 or whatever to get into it. And that's not true.
No, that's right.
It's flat out not true. And so I start with something that I show them, look, you can do this for, $2.50. And you can do it any way you want. And by the way, if you don't like it, you can change it, right? If you can edit an email, then you can edit the delays in this to make it work the way you want it to work.
Yeah, that's great.
You don't have to learn programming. So I am not a proponent of teaching people how to program if they're modeling. Yeah. Now, I've taught classes in computer science and all the other things. I'm not saying that you shouldn't learn, but I'm saying that, look, the vast majority of modelers out there, what do they want to do? They want to model. They don't want to go and play with computers.
Correct.
So that's part of the whole scheme. The other part of it is that and this is true of engineers too, by the way, and I had worked with many, many engineers in my career. Typically, when they want to go and build something, the first thing they do is say, oh, let me find the biggest, fastest, most powerful little processor to go and use. That's irrelevant, because the lowly Arduino in its most primitive form can handle an awful lot, from lighting, servo control, stepper motor control, sound, coordination of all of that, even DCC decoders. Of a large variety. And you can do that for, a very, very low cost. Yeah. So if you want to get into this and you want to try things out, this is a great way to do it. And you don't need to go and spend an arm and a leg to do it. In fact, you'll spend less than a single cup of coffee at a Starbucks.
Yeah, definitely will.
That's significant, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I have to convince people who particularly have some background with electronics or electricity or using components is, look, when you have this little computer that you can reset and change any way you want, and it costs you $2 a pop, you should be thinking about that as a component and not as, I've got this computer and I'm going to cram as much as I can into it.
Yeah.
You need to change your perspective. And it took me about 2 years to do that, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I tried to do what the typical engineer does, which is, I'm making this thing blink a grade crossing. It ought to be able to do 400 other things.
Yeah.
Well, waste of time.
Yeah, that's right.
Complete waste of time. And the adjunct to that is when I make a mistake and I blow one of these up, I haven't lost my livelihood.
No, right.
I've lost a component. Yeah. I reach into the bag, I pull another one out, I set it up, and away
you go. That's exactly right. So it's quite a good segue, I think, the lighting animation. So we'll start with that one if you wish, Geoff. So this is the scale model animation. So this is obviously the, as you put it, sort of the introduction, and obviously as you build the sequences and the randomness into this. So I'll just start the video going. If you just want to talk about, you can see on let's get that going there. So if you won't hear any sound, Geoff, I've sort of muted the sound out, but if you want to start talking about this project, because it all sort of stems from, you talked about, you didn't want randomness like a Christmas tree, and also a single light source is too toy-like. It's pretty well the theme I got out of the blog.
Right. Now, this particular building lighting sequence has, it's probably got 20 different things that I talk about in my clinics. You just saw the 3 windows come on as if it was a fluorescent light. It flickers on. Yep. If you look at the other windows in the sequence, you'll see that they come on, but they don't go off right away. And it's as if a person entered the room. You don't go into the room, flick the light on, and then immediately leave. You do something in the room. Yeah. And I grew up in a city, and when you walk around in the city at night, you see this all the time with large buildings. The lights are going on and off, but they're going on and off in a slow, methodical pattern that has some sense to it. So the randomness is not really random. It's random in the sense of the sequence is random, But it turns out that once it turns on, it's on for typically about 60% of the time.
Yeah.
Now you see the colored lighting there, and that's a party going on.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
And that's a different kind of sequence
Yeah.
with multicolored LEDs. And you also see the guy who comes to the window, 2 windows over.
Yeah.
And it turns, right there where your mouse is. And it turns out he comes to the window and he yells out, "Turn it up, turn it up." Well, comes out and yells, "Turn it up," in like 8 different ways.
Yeah.
So every time he goes there to turn it up, it literally the volume of the music from the party goes up.
Yeah.
And of course, what the music that the party is playing is randomly selected from 12 different selections. So the sequence there, it picks one randomly. Now in the top corner, you see a light gone on, and there's another figure that moves to the window after, right there. And he went back now as the light comes on, and he says, shut it off, that's enough, And he has 8 different sequences of audio that he says when he comes to the window. So you have the 2 guys, as the party erupts and re-erupts, one guy is asking for more loudness, and the other one's trying to shut it down. So that's part of the story that's going on in the building, together with everything else.
Yeah.
Now, in the bottom right of the building, there's a guy actually welding, and he's got an indirect sequence of light. And again, it's a blue and a white LED, and it's flickering in a very definite pattern to indicate a welding pattern. So it's going like flicker, 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 flicker. And then there's a short pause. It'll start again for a random period, a short pause, just like a welder would be inspecting the weld every time he goes through and does another part of the weld. Now, I think you have selected a video of that building where you can't see what's going on in the lower left. And in the lower left, right there, if you had the right video, this may be an early video.
Yeah.
It turns out that room has an OLED screen at the back of the room. And on that screen is a picture of the room, and superimposed on that picture in sequence is a figure that moves from place to place to place in that scene. Now, you'd say, well, if I looked at it in detail, that's a pretty jerky thing. It's not a video, because what I did was I literally took a picture of a figure and superimposed it, and all I'm doing is playing back picture after picture after picture after picture. And it's like the old, I don't know if you had him in Australia, not Jack in the Box. What was the candy corn? Gosh, I don't remember the name of the candy. But you would have a little toy Cracker Jacks. You'd have a little toy inside of Cracker Jacks, and sometimes the little toy was this little set of pictures. And if you held them in your hand and then flipped them across really fast, it would look like a comic strip moving,
like a cartoon,
right?
Yeah.
So that was one of my very first attempts to do the equivalent of that, except with electronics and pictures. So it turns out in that building, to do the audio sequence and the moving of the 2 figures in the 2 rooms, one Arduino is controlling that. A second Arduino is controlling all the other lights in the building, including the welding.
Yeah.
And a third Arduino controlled that, what I call the virtual room in the corner.
Right.
But they're all operating to tell a story for the building.
Yeah.
Now, beyond that, if you look at the detail of the lighting in each of the rooms, you'll notice that they're not the same. And some of them are positioned, if you look, to create the effect of there's a light in the corner of the room. Mm-hmm. Another is you can't tell where the light is positioned in the room. Another is it's a ceiling light and it's positioned right in the middle of the room. Depending on how you point and position the LED, in that little cubby hole that represents the room, you get different effects. And also, there are different things on the windows. There's I can't remember if you can see it now, but one of the windows has a silhouette of a young lady. Another window has like a sign on the window itself. A couple of windows, I think, had a shade or two.
Yeah.
So the treatment of the light, the color of the light, the position of the light, how it turns on, how it turns off, how it's sequenced in the overall lighting of the building, that all goes in to tell a story, and all has a variation. I worked out the total number of combinations in the building. It will repeat in about 1.3 years. So nobody looking at it is going to look at it and say, "Oh, I know where it is in the sequence."
Yeah.
It's not. You're not going to find that out.
Give us some sort of idea how big these rooms are. So,
excellent. So this building is only about 2 or 3 windows deep, and I think it's the MT Arms building or something like that.
Right.
And it's been reworked. The doors on the bottom have been reworked. Some of the windows have been covered. And the other thing about the windows, there's 3 different kinds of windows. If you look in the window where the welder is, it's absolutely clear acetate, clear plastic.
Clear plastic, yeah.
To see right in, and the room itself is detailed all the way to the back of the room.
Sure.
The other windows, they're actually dull coated. The acetate is dull coated and then applied. And the reason is the dull coat doesn't make the window look frosted. It makes it look dirty. And so when you have the LED behind it, it diffuses the light.
Okay.
And you can pick it up flickering or coming on or off very, very noticeably.
Yeah.
And it really enhances the effect. Where I have a figure actually moving in the room up to a window and backing out, you'll notice that A, a light goes on in the room, B, the figure moves and comes to the window, and there's no acetate or glass in the window as if the window's open. And that's to maximize the view of the figure moving to the window.
Yeah.
You can see the side.
The size of it,
yeah. So the way that building is built, if you think about the building as kind of a C shape for the front and the sides, what I did was I reinforced the sides so that you could slide a floor made of black styrene into each level.
Right.
So there were 2 strips of styrene, and you slide the black floor styrene in between. Right. So I literally had a shelf for each floor.
Yeah.
And I built up like a little rabbit warren, a little set of walls to depict rooms that were 2 windows wide, 1 window wide, or in the case of the fluorescent lit, what I call the lab, that's 3 windows wide.
Yeah.
So behind all of those are visual blocks so that you can't see the light from the next room.
Yeah, okay.
And that's what enhances the effect.
I was going to ask the next question. Sorry, go on.
The other critical thing is the joints and the plastic. If you have an LED and you point it right at the inside of even that thick plastic, you will actually see the plastic emit some of the light through the plastic as if it were translucent. You have to avoid that. So before everything gets set up, I spray paint the inside, typically white, and that will block the light going through.
Okay.
The other thing is at the joint. If I have a loose joint, I will take either putty or glue, sometimes Elmer's white glue, put a bead down it, and then paint over it. And you want to make sure that no light is getting from room to room or from floor to floor or outside directly through the plastic that makes up the building.
Yeah.
So if you paint the walls either on the inside or the outside or both, you're great.
Yeah.
And typically what I do is the floors, I always make black, and the ceiling, I typically always make white, and the inside walls, I make white.
Fascinating.
And the reason is I want the light to be reflected inside the room.
Right.
And the only difference is if I have a figure moving that you could see inside, it's got to be decorated in a way not to see the mechanism that moves the figure.
Yeah.
Or if I've got special lighting in there, I don't want you to see anything special about the mechanism that's involved.
Yeah, sure.
So where the two figures are moving, there's actually a servo that's moving the figure up to the window. You can see it just lit up now on the third floor, second from the left.
Yep.
So the figure moves with a servo to move him to the window. After the light goes on in the room to highlight the fact that the figure's there, and then he'll yell out, turn it up, and then go back into the back of the room and the light will turn off. So you're sequencing the whole thing to highlight your attention to go to that room to realize that that's the figure that's speaking.
Yeah, wow. So I think what I'm getting out of this also is when you paint the inside of the building, I've always painted them black, but I'm very, very wrong with some of that. Obviously, the floors you do, I understand that. But the walls, I like the idea of the refraction of a lighter colour being the white.
Right.
Is what I'm taking away from that as well. I'm blown away with the lighting and the animatronics there, or the animation, I should say. Yeah, that's why I picked this one. This is just, I'm going to start, probably maybe not going to this level, but I'm assuming, if I'm wrong, as you say, the Arduinos are very easy to program, as long as you know IDE for the Arduino side of things, which is, it's basically plug and play and push a few buttons, and that's about all you need to do. And basic sort of editing, as you say, with an email. If you can do an email, yes, you can do the sketches for these. But is it the sort of thing where you can sort of build in sort of basic lighting with some lights just coming on and off, and then you start building more and more complexity and more sequence into it as you go along for someone as they sort of they're coming more au fait or more experienced using Arduino?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the way this building started was only with the lights that you see that are kind of the incandescent color.
Yeah.
And the very first demo I did with the building were only those lights.
Yeah.
And I added the others incrementally as I thought of new ways of presenting new ideas. All of the lighting effects, all of the sketches that get loaded to have all these different effects,
sure,
I published all the sketches for these that I ever created.
Yeah.
So and they're freely downloadable, right? I don't ever charge for anything I've ever done.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I'm not the only one that's doing it.
Yeah.
So if you want to go and get, say, a candle flicker from an Arduino, you can literally go to the net and type in Arduino candle flicker sketch.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to get 6 of them or more, right? Or campfire or fire, whatever. And these have just taken off. But originally, when I first started publishing, there were very few, but there are a lot of people who will go and modify them, see what happens when they change them, and they get different effects. So they make them their own. And that, to me, is the best possible thing that can happen.
Yeah, definitely.
There's one other thing I wanted to point out with the building, though, and this is actually, I wrote an article, Modeler's Introduction to the Arduino, and it's got 20 different sketches in it, and a whole bunch of them have to do with lighting. And in there's sketch for a black and white TV and a color TV. And there's also sketches to turn on incandescent and fluorescence too, that stuff, and fires and all that stuff. But I wanted to talk about black and white TV and color TV because when people looked at them, they looked at them and said that's not showing me a picture. Well, it's not supposed to. If you put the light and the LEDs and the Arduino to control that in one of the rooms, it will flicker, say, a bluish tint LED and it'll flicker the way a old-fashioned black and white TV used to flicker.
Yeah.
Right. And what you're doing is you're creating an indirect lighting effect. Right. You're not looking directly at the light. You're looking at the side effect of the light. So it's really important that you understand that. And the color TV has a red, a green, and a blue LED, and they flicker in accordance with the way you would expect a color TV to create that lighting effect, as if you were walking by the building at night and you looked in and you saw somebody had a TV on and it was flickering like that as they watched TV. So lots of lighting effects you can get simply by understanding what the effect is that you're trying to create.
Sure.
The party is a wild scene that's meant to be chaotic and not repetitive, as if you literally had a party going on. So you're literally trying to create a different kind of timing sequence. Likewise, if what you were trying to do was to create the effect of a strobe or a lighthouse flash or a barrier sequence where you had light start at the beginning and the middle of the barrier and then incrementally go out from the middle. Or you had a whole row of lights like on an airport strip that were blinking in succession to guide the airplane in. All of those things can be created, and all of those are available.
Yeah, lovely. I'll throw this conversation down, and yes, please take a drink. Then I've just recently come across Neopixel LEDs. How are you finding the use of those, or you don't use them personally, or?
Neopixels are addressable and they're controllable because they're actually 3 LEDs
in the one.
In one, and you control the combination of them to get different colors.
Sure.
I have yet to find a really good example where I wanted to go and do that.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
There are other ways to do the equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that I have a difficulty with is that the Neopixels are relatively expensive compared to the vast majority of LEDs I use.
Yeah.
The LEDs that are in that building probably cost me 3 cents a piece.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is I buy all white LEDs and then I color them with Tamiya clear paints to get the colors that I want.
Wow. Okay. Yep.
And consequently, I only stock one color LED. Whereas years ago, I'd have to buy red ones and green ones and, whatever other color I wanted. Well, it turns out that's a waste of time and it's a waste of money.
Okay.
So I avoid that.
Yeah.
Neopixels might work if you were trying to do something where maybe you had a real reason to have a color shift over time.
Yeah.
The typical thing I could think of, even though I wouldn't use Neopixels, would be if I were doing layout wide lighting overhead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to show a transition lighting for sunrise and sunset.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Neopixel could be used to go and do that, but you need a lot of them.
Yeah.
And there are other ways to do it that are cheaper.
Yeah, sure. So what we might quickly look at, we're coming up 47 minutes. This has been fantastic conversation. Another little one I came across is the critter guidance. So this is a fantastic little project, I think. This is awesome what you've done here. So this is liking to, I suppose, fella car system, but a hell of a lot cheaper, I'm assuming, to set that up. So just talk us through how this came about.
If you look on the bottom of the crane, you're going to see a little white stick. And there's the only thing, that white stick is attached to the bottom rear of the crane. And in the front is a 0.5 millimeter by, I think, 2 millimeter or 3 millimeter magnet, a rare earth magnet. And embedded below the black plastic surface that you can see there is a steel wire. Now, I actually used a coat hanger when I did that particular demo. You could see that as I move the crane back and forth, it's sticking to the wire underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And as it is, I drag the crane back and forth, but you notice since it's sticking to the wire, it's going from side to side. Well, there's a sensor right above each extreme side of that. That's a Hall effect sensor, and it's a magnetic sensor.
Right.
And it's being picked up by an Arduino that's inside that crane. And as it does, it's saying okay, and there you can see the coat hanger wire that was embedded in the foam core and then covered with a piece of black plastic. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And you can make that into incredible, and that's the Arduino and the motor driver that's inside. And the crane uses that magnetic stick, magnet on the stick, to move around, because if it goes astray, it'll move the magnet under one side or the other, and the Arduino simply compensates for that by moving it in the other direction. So when you see it move around, it wiggles, and it turns out that I looked at it later. It turns out you can do an even better job that makes it wiggle less.
Yeah, yeah.
But it really showed up the actual movement and the actual mechanism.
Yeah.
And it was actually relatively simple.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think I published that twice. There was an article in Model Railroad Hobbyist with 4 cranes, and that was I redid that particular crane, but it's the same mechanism.
Yeah, sure.
The faller
fantastic.
system also has an embedded wire, but and it also has a magnet. But what the faller system does is, as the magnet moves from side to side, it's literally moving the front wheels to steer the car mechanically.
Yeah.
Whereas this is actually steered electronically.
Yeah.
And the 2 treads are operated independently.
Yeah.
That crane actually can make a turn sharper than a faller car could make.
Yeah, yeah.
Very, very sharp turn.
Which is quite interesting. I don't know if you've ever driven a skid steer, which is similar to that. When I first saw that going in a straight line, that's exactly what they do, because you've got 2 sort of opposing sort of levers you're pushing forwards at different rates to sort of, and it sort of does. It's very hard to actually get them to go in a perfectly straight line. So when I looked at that, I'm going, that's just fantastic. So, and I'm assuming the iterations of that is the crane operates as well, or you've just left that as a sort of the static part of the model?
In that particular crane, the hook does not operate, but I had another variation of that was remote controlled, and it had a light on it, and the hook went up and down.
That's fantastic.
It's an issue of how many motors do you want to cram inside?
Yeah, that's right.
And the other issue about that is that's battery operated with a rechargeable LiPo battery.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was astonished that I could actually operate that for hours.
Yeah.
So one of the things I had intended to do, in fact, I did as a different demo for another clinic, was I built a diorama with buildings, and I had it going through the streets.
Yeah.
Following the embedded wire, carrying a tube, like a culvert, as it's going through the street, and it would get right to the end where it looked like it was going to crash into something, and of course it turned. It wound up being a pretty cool demo.
Yeah,
but the other mechanism that I built using a similar thing didn't use the embedded wire. It used a remote controller. With a little radio connected to the driver. And so you could actually steer it around.
Yeah, sure.
Basically the same kind of mechanism, though.
Yeah, sure. So what we'll look at the last one here, the single action traction motor, because there's a little bit of a backstory to this by what you're telling me.
Is.
So we'll get that video going and sort of just tell us what the backstory is, because I think it's a lovely little story, how this sort of came about.
Well, this is one of those things where a friend of mine who is a really exceptionally good modeler locally, John Harrison, he models the I guess the Southern Pacific, in one specific part of the country, and the junction where he really has a great, highly detailed model of, literally has every track at that junction. And what the Southern Pacific did there is they would have, I think, was a 210 or 210 one or two of them as a helper on the rear of the train going through the pass.
Yeah.
And as it did, and it made it through the pass, at the top of the pass, the helpers would drop off, but there was a caboose behind the helpers. So they would back up the caboose on this grade and up to the top of the grade, and it would set the brakes. The helpers would drive down, back away, and then turn on a Y. And to couple back to the train, they would simply release the brakes after the switch was thrown correctly, and the caboose would literally, gravity operated, slip down the grade and couple onto the end of the train.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they could also control the braking as it was moving, but John was absolutely adamant that he was going to recreate this thing, and he was going through all kinds of machinations about rubber band drive and all kinds of other things. And I went over to see his layout. I was always been so impressed with his modeling, and he told me about this problem, and I kept thinking about it, and about probably 3 months later, I thought, I wonder if you could create, in effect, a traction motor around the axle and give it a boost to go and do it. And here's my little test track. And here what I was trying to do, and so what I did was I took two little, I think they're called N10 motors, and they just barely fit between the wheels of a HO truck, and managed to find the right wheels. I wound up with using KD wheels that had a plastic axle, and fit the motor between the wheel set precisely, and then drop the two into an Athearn truck, which was a plastic truck, and then put a stabilizing bar so that they don't turn, and actually wired it in the truck. And when you look at the side of the truck, you can't see the motor. They're that tiny. And then drove it with a very simple Digitrax decoder, which I had to tune because the normal operation for the two motors is freewheeling. So as you're pulling the caboose around, nothing's happening to the motors, literally nothing. But when you wanted to slide down that little grade and couple onto the back of the train on that little hill, what you do is you give it a kick with that decoder. And what I found out was, strangely enough, you not only could give it a kick, you could actually drive the caboose. And what we found out was you could weigh the caboose down and would give it more traction with these two tiny little motors.
Lovely.
And you could literally drive the caboose up the hill with just the two axle motors. So I was absolutely stunned. And John played with the decoder more and more. And he got it so that he could place it at the top of the hill, pull the ones off, and then just drive it right to the back of the train. And they took a video of it. It was astonishing. And there you can see it, the two little motors on the bottom of the caboose. And the other truck is simply wired to pick up DCC off the track. So you have four-wheel pickup for DCC, the two little motors driving it. Well, John was just thrilled because he couldn't solve the problem. And it was one of these things that I just loved because it was, I've got a problem. I have no idea how to solve it. There's no solution for it, yada, yada, yada. And you think about it, and all of a sudden something pops in your head and you wind up creating this completely different solution for it. And people looked at it and said, hey, I've got this 6-axle traction electric that I wonder if I put 6 motors in, if I can make it all go, and I wasn't going there. That wasn't the purpose of it. But I was really thrilled that other people looked at it and said, hey, I wonder if I could make a better model starting with that. And that, to me, was the best compliment in the world.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So everything I do like that, if somebody looks at it and picks it up and says, hey, I might be able to do something with this that he didn't think of, that to me is the best possible thing.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. Well, Geoff, you've told us a very, very short overview of your life's work effectively in model trains. Thank you so much for the time and effort and the thought that's gone behind a lot of these sketches, and I look forward to diving into more of them and adding some of this animation to myself. I love the little animation philosophy that talks about the model, the lighting, the motion, the sound that gives and with the overall backstory, like we sort of spoke about with definitely the building and obviously the little caboose there as well. It's just, it's just another one of those little niches of the hobby I'm looking forward to drilling down in. I've ordered a whole lot of Arduinos. They're still coming. As you say, they're only a few dollars each if you ruin them or miswire them, which is pretty hard to do with your instructions, that's for sure. So
no, I have destroyed quite a few of them.
Yeah. But I've yet to do that. But I'm assuming once I start to experiment a little bit more, I will start destroying some as well. Hence why I've probably got a dozen of them sitting literally to my right over here, all ready to go.
The one other thing I can add that I'm very, very proud of, I mentioned that the thing I really get the most satisfaction out is seeing somebody take what I've done and do something else with it. Yeah. I've gotten feedback from people, modelers in almost 40 countries around the world.
That's fantastic.
That they've taken something that I've built and they've done something else with it. And that to me is the greatest part of the hobby. Yeah. It's just a terrific thing.
And it's been lovely chatting with you. Just by your voice, you can't but get inspired. You got a passion that's just second to none in regards to the electronic side of things. And I was just playing around with a few little circuits this morning, and I'm going to go on to your blog post, which I will link everything below. Please have a look at it, because there's just some, even if that's not your thing, just some phenomenal work that you're doing in this space. So thanks for chatting with me at Model Railroad Techniques today.
Well, thanks for having me. Very much appreciated. I wish you happy modeling and make better models.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you again.
Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Techniques.